Hello and welcome to this evening's episode of On the Record. On the show tonight, we bring you the highlights from what was a very long and sometimes dramatic day in the Constitutional Court. President Jacob Zuma's lawyers admitting that the public protector's rulings are legally binding after all. But first, Parliament's new tougher rules will be applied to the letter during the State of the Nation address on Thursday. National Assembly Speaker Baleka Mbete says MPs should have no doubt about this. Last week, the EFF threatened disruption if President Jacob Zuma doesn't begin by explaining his axing of former Finance Minister Nkandla.
Determined to avoid a repeat of Sona 2015. Parliament says it's taken note of the EFF's threat and is ready to crack down on unruliness.
We will apply the rules, yes. Have no doubt about it.
Parliament's protection services have been boosted. It will bolster the work of security agencies. Nothing will be left to chance.
We take into account everything we hear, everything everybody is saying, including the Youth League and the EFF out there. We take all of those things into account. And when we get the appropriate briefings, we raise those issues. We ask those with the expertise whose job it is to focus on those matters to please make sure that they leave no stone unturned to make sure that the occasion runs smoothly.
And the Speaker has welcomed the 3 planned marches on Thursday. She's described the Ses Corner, the Zuma Must Fall and Fees Must Fall marches as a fair expression of freedom in a democratic South Africa. Nkandla, SABC News, Parliament.
Well, joining us now here in the studio, the Secretary General of the ANC, just to talk us through some of the priorities for the governing party this coming on Thursday. Mr. Nkandla, thanks very much for joining us.
Good evening for you.
Well, from where you've had Lekgotlas, you had your January 8 statement. I'm sure whatever the President will be saying on Thursday is neatly and nicely packaged to make sure that the nation really takes something, or a lot, I should be saying, out of that State of the Nation address. What for you are the issues he simply won't be able to ignore?
I can base my observation on the NEC Lekgotla and the January 8th. You are right there. Beyond that, we allow the Cabinet to meet. They work on the State of the Nation address. But our expectation is that they can't cut out the priorities that the ruling party has put as priorities.
Which are?
I will start with, there will be 4 areas of focus in the main. The first one will be the economy. 2, it will be education. 3, it will be local government. And 4, it will be advancing people's power. Those will be 4.
Let's start with the economy.
Yes.
What is he going to say? Things are not looking good out there, the world over. What is it that is unique that the President is expected to say?
What we are expecting of the President is to talk to specific sectors. One, we should appreciate the fact that since 2008, we have been to a recession only once. It was in 2009 when we had a negative growth for 3 months. Since then, we never. But our growth is very low. And we're not going to improve that unless we focus on macroeconomic framework. 2, unless we have specific sectors that are given particular targets, and there is allocation of resources, which will be a function of the budget much later. One of those will be your agriculture. Agriculture has a lot of potential in South Africa. We have not moved close to the Maputo declaration of allocating 10% of the budget on agriculture.
It's in dire straits right now.
Yes, because of drought, but it's not in bad shape. There's drought, and now the rains have arrived late. We'll have less than we expected in terms of harvest. but we'll have some harvest. But the price of maize is going to go up. The person who's going to actually feel the pressure of drought is going to be the end consumer. Otherwise, farmers will have some maize to harvest, will make a killing out of the prices of maize. And number two, manufacturing remains our focus. We must talk about energy and talk about the energy mix. See, half of the time when we talk about energy, people run for nuclear and therefore say it is unaffordable. And our argument is very simple. Nuclear is like any other source of energy in the sense that when you build coal power station, you don't build a power station that is giving you 9,600 megawatts. You build one that gives you 2,004, you give another one that gives you 3,000, and so on. But if you say the target is in the long term 9,006, it doesn't mean you'll build one big nuclear power station. All those issues should be on the state of the nation. That is on the economy. And our view is that unless we work together, the public sector and the private sector, we're not going to come out of the hole.
Well, speaking of working together and still on the economy, I mean, you have your Anglos. Now, looks like they are shrinking their operations here. It doesn't look like the government's message is being listened to. They have just come back from Davos, and it didn't look like we were the flavors.
No. Look, after Davos, we've actually improved in terms of the international competitiveness, the global competitiveness, from 56 to 49 in the world. That's a magic improvement. And that is a function of some semblance of having the same measures from Team South Africa. And if we can continue doing that, it will be better. The reaction of the mining industry, to me, as a mine worker for many years, I think is strange, to say the least, that when the prices of commodities are on a downward cycle, you close shafts and close mines. It's the worst reaction that you can ever have, because...
Isn't that what business does?
No. Commodity prices are by nature cyclical. Good mining companies factor that in their planning. And therefore, when there is a downward cycle, you don't go out with a bloodbath of retrenchment and you fire people, you close shafts, and then you come back and complain. Anglo-American, I think, is actually very, very mischievous in terms of the way it is handling this current crisis of commodity prices.
What do you think drives what they are doing?
My gut feel will first of all say, because Anglo all of a sudden is a foreign investor, it doesn't behave in a way that is patriotic. And that's why in the Fraser Institute, we'll be rated 53 in terms of mining capacity, despite the richness of our mineral deposits, because most of the executives are not South African, and then we don't have a South African mining champion. As a result of that, they behave the way they behave. Glencoe is doing the same. For example, I was listening to the NUM complaining on an Exxaro mine, which is closed by Exxaro because they want to sell coal to Eskom at higher price. If they don't take, they throw it away. Then the debate shifts from the mischief of Exxaro and Glencoe in Optimum and Anode, and it becomes, why is this mine given to the Gupta family, which to me becomes an obsession as far as I'm concerned, because Exxaro and Glencoe must maintain and be able to give coal to Eskom at acceptable prices.
You don't think there's an issue around the whole Gupta's thing?
I don't have an obsession about it. If they are having mischief, that's what we should deal with. What we should not do is to say when Eskom want coal at a particular price, major mining company, we can't give you that price, and a smaller company, because it is owned by Guptas, takes that operation and sell at a lower price. Why is a bigger mining company can't afford selling at that price? You know, historically, coal to Eskom was actually on the basis of cost plus 3%. That's what it was. Now it is on market. We buy coal here as if we're buying it on a spot market globally. That is where the patriotism of the private sector is tested.
Well, speaking of the Guptas, is it really an obsession or is it something that people find abnormal?
Can I tell you? To me, anybody who manipulates the economy is bad. That is bad news.
Are the Guptas manipulating?
Well, all I'm saying is that if optimum is given to them, Arnold is given to them, all is given to them, there will be something suspicious of that from any other person. But the point I'm making is, the obsession is when you leave Exaro scot-free, and you leave Glencoe scot-free, you leave Anglo-American scot-free, and then we all shift the debate and focus on the Guptas, I think we are going to lose out in the sense that major mining companies go away and run with murder. When they should be actually sustaining the economy, they run away and dump assets. And that dumping of assets is going to translate into what we call in mining terms high grading, where they only focus on high-grade mines and leave marginal shafts and sterilize them in the long term.
Okay, let's move on to local government. I mean, Senator, we're expecting local government elections this year. What do you expect the president to say around local government?
Local government, in the January 8th, we located the advancement of people's power in the local government. And we had a subheading that says, local government is in your hand. And in the ANC, we have taken a resolution that communities should decide who are the representatives in local government.
Which means what exactly?
It means the ANC can say, with these three candidates, they must go to communities. If communities say, these are bad news, you see, and the ANC must listen and be able to say, you are not going to put your preferred candidate as a councillor if communities think that is bad news. We're busy with that list process all over. We've picked up a number of areas where there is an attempt to actually avoid doing that, and we're saying to provinces, at point X there is a complaint. In Matatiel, there are 4 branches that are complaining that a deploy of the ANC undermined the views of the community. In Mount Frere, the regional deploys, they undermine the wills of the communities. Go there, intervene. That's what we're doing now. We're busy with that process. And it's the most complex process. No other party does that.
Would you accept that in the main, the views that people have formed around, or their perceptions of local government and its inefficiencies and inadequacies is largely because of the ANC's performance?
Now, let me tell you what people always put on the negative. The ANC has introduced local government that services everybody. We introduced a wall-to-wall local government. And a small dorpy called Nkandla in the Eastern Cape, which services very few people in town, is all of a sudden must service all the villages. And those villages, if you go there, they appreciate the extension of services to the villages. People don't talk about that. And what people also have refused to notice is that we have started the Back to Basics program few years ago, and it is reflected in the improvement on the audit reports. The audit results, there are more unqualified audits, there are more clean audits, there are fewer disclaimers. And in the Back to Basics, we're doing many things that are basic. We say, appoint people who are skilled to those positions. Don't appoint people who are not qualified. Remove refuse. Supply water. Supply electricity. Close potholes. If you do those basic things, local government will be accepted in communities. If you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. And in the majority of cases, there is a response to those back to basics requirements, and people are beginning to implement back to basics. And we're hoping that the president will be able to talk more on the back to basics, because back to basics about local government, that is serving the people.
Which a lot of you public representatives at local government rejected at first. But let's go to advancing the poor.
Anything that is testing you and put you on the spotlight, you reject. But it's not about you who should be an agent to accept or reject. It is the parties that should enforce it, that back to basics is our program, you will all comply. Take a metro like Mangaung, Vuyo, which was in disclaimer, today is having unqualified audit. And to me it's because we forced them to apply back to basic principles and it improved the performance.
Let's talk about the advancement of the poor. Where should the president begin?
The advancement of people's power. The first thing is that government is in government because it represents the aspirations and interests of the vast majority. If it does not, then there is a big problem. That is where we start from advancing people's power. So people must have a say in their affairs, in how they are governed. But it doesn't mean that we govern by referendums. It means that you get the views of the people, implement the programs that respond to those issues. When people say, hashtag fees must fall, government must be responsive, but it should never be reckless and go out there and be populist and say, there will be free higher education next year. Because if it does that, it is going to be popular, but it will collapse the system.
Well, it's your resolution. When do you think it's practical?
Actually, it is actually implemented. That's why you will notice, Vuyo, 87% of basic education is in no-fee schools. Every is the TVETs now. All of them, when you get NSFAS, it is a grant. For the final year in degree, it's a grant. Research for masters and PhDs is for free. It is sponsored by the state. So there is a progress that has been made. We must fill it up by actually ensuring that first year and second year get access to that free education for the poor. Those who should pay, who can pay and afford paying, must continue paying. The private sector must increase the number of bursaries and scholarships. The state resources must be directed at giving children from poor households access to education and begin to turn around the level of poverty at household level.
Well, we've run out of time, but you have to answer this before you go. Your reaction to today's court proceedings?
You know, Vuyo, people will tend to forget this. At the beginning of these processes, we said we must allow state institutions to deal with this matter. You remember when there was the report of interministerial and the report of the public protector? The ANC said when there are two public institutions taking a decision on an issue, the only thing you can do that, you can take that for a review. And the only capable body that can do a review is a court of law. We said that then. Everybody threw that out of the window, ignored it. They are back there today. That's the only thing that is happening, the ANC.
Well, you don't think that, looking at what happened today, shouldn't this have happened a lot earlier? I mean, no one stopped the president, or anyone for that matter, to take the matter for a review, but it never happened. And what everyone is asking now is, given what happened today, where basically the president's lawyer conceded to virtually everything, what was the point? Why put the country into this whole drama and fuss, as some people would say?
And to me, what happened in the
only to, at the end of the day, concede?
What happened in the Constitutional Court today is another confirmation of democracy at work and confidence that is put on institutions. The reason that we have insisted on saying allow institutions to go, if an High Court Committee of Parliament does work on the issue, the ANC has actually been quite careful not to get into that space. Allow Parliament and institutions to deal with that issue. It is taken to court. The ANC was not even mentioned once today in the court, because it has taken a view that says allow the institutions of state to deal with the problems of state.
You don't think this whole thing has come at a cost to our nation?
Cost because it is still in the ConCourt.
Relations, the possible undermining of state institutions?
No. One of these that is before the court is the role of a Chapter 9 institution, for example. whatever comes out of there in respect of the public protector, we must appreciate the fact that it will be applicable to a number of Chapter 9 institutions. It is strengthening those institutions. And those are institutions of democracy.
That's why we're going to leave it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Well, the Secretary General of the ANC. Time now to take a quick ad break. When we return, the highlights or the highs and lows of today's ConCourt sitting. That's after this short ad break.
Get all the latest news from the SABC's online news services on our website. Breaking news and in-depth coverage of everything from business, sports to politics and lifestyle. Catch the top news clips and watch live streaming of major news events on the SABC News YouTube channel whenever. Stay connected on the SABC News Facebook page and have your say on news that matters to you. And for the latest headlines and live updates from our reporters, follow us on Twitter. SABC Digital News, anytime, anywhere.
Well, the EFF's lawyers were first to take the stand today. At the heart of their submission, all the reasons why President Jacob Zuma should comply with the public protector's rulings.
The public protector has the power to take appropriate remedial action. Our submission is that that power includes the power to make binding administrative orders. The public protector ordered him to make restoration to the state. He defied her to protect the wealth he had obtained in a manner held by the public protector to be unlawful, and in that way used his position to enrich himself or improperly benefit other person. The President can only be called to account by the National Assembly, so it's a very important tool, and the National Assembly has the ultimate power of dismissal. It failed in its failure, it violated the Constitution in its failure to call him to account at all. The National Assembly's duty is a unique duty, and if it qualifies us for exclusive jurisdiction, then the whole case qualifies for exclusive jurisdiction. This is a matter of high constitutional and public importance. It's a matter of high political contention. Parliament is in disarray from time to time, and there is great disturbance and unhappiness about the failure to resolve this issue. Despite the SCA judgment, it is clear that this matter has not been finally put to bed.
Well, the President's lawyers, when it was their turn, they hardly contested any of the assertions by the applicants. The question then was, why did it take so long for the President to agree to comply after all?
What there was is, in a phrase used by at least two of my colleagues, an evolution of thinking. And that evolution of thinking is unsurprising given the fact that this is new territory.
And in all the time he didn't comply with the public protector's remedial action, did President Jacob Zuma do so in good faith, was the question.
We submit that the President defied the public protector's orders, and that his defiance constituted a violation of his duties under the Constitution. May I first deal with the facts before I turn to the constitutional implications of those facts? The conduct of the President, or the President's response to the Public Protector's report, starts with his report of the 2nd of April 2014, It is in the EFF papers at page 259. And I won't go there because it's an early response, but I note that at page 260, the President says two things. He says, firstly, describes the Public Protector's orders as recommendations, and secondly, says, I must now apply my mind to her recommendations and the report of the Ministerial Task Team. So he doesn't recognize that her orders enjoy any status beyond that of a recommendation, and he treats them as if they are no more and of no more significance than the recommendations of his own Ministerial Task Team. That was the President's first report. Then there was his second report of the 14th of August 2014. That is at page 52 of the EFF's papers. And again, the same thing. He says, firstly, at page 65, in paragraph 51, speaks of the Public Protector's proposals. And secondly, at page 70, in paragraph 63.2, says that he has decided that the Minister of Police must now decide whether he should repay anything, and if so, how much. So he doesn't recognize the binding nature of the Public Protector's report at all.
The fact that the President was bona fide was irrelevant. And I don't wish to be misunderstood in any way. It is no part of our argument that the President acted in bad faith. That is irrelevant. We can assume, as we do assume, that he acted in good faith. The real question is, did he err in law? And if it was a material error of law, then that, on our argument, is with respect the end of the matter. And we do submit that he erred in law, and we advance the argument on an acceptance that he did so in good faith.
Well, what also came under the spotlight was the National Assembly's role in all of this. What was it supposed to do, and did it do what it was supposed to do? Okay, we seem to have a problem with the audio of that particular story. But joining us now is constitutional law expert Khomotso Moshikaro from the University of Cape Town. Khomotso, thank you very much for joining us. If I may just start with, after the EFF's lawyers outlined and gave us the reasons as to why the President should have complied in the first instance. Were you surprised by how the President's lawyers simply accepted virtually everything?
Quite, actually. It was a rather surprising move, especially since that there had been a similar case that the DA had instituted in court against the SABC. And in that case, there are two separate judgments that have very, very different views about exactly what the powers of the Public Protector are. There is the Supreme Court of Appeal judgment, which basically avers the position that the EFF lawyers took. But then again, there is the High Court judgment. And the High Court actually took a view that really could have been in support of the President, arguably, if one interpreted that judgment very broadly. So it was rather surprising that they actually effectively conceded the absolute binding effect of the Public Protector's report.
From where you sit, someone like me who's a layman, I would have thought that even though they would concede at the end of the day, I would have thought that they would have at least flagged some critical issues. Were there simply no issues, or did they just think, let's forget about it?
I mean, it may have been a matter of strategy. So you're reading the bench and you know your audience. And perhaps they just think that it wasn't worth the time to waste on that, and rather maybe they can get concessions elsewhere. But really, there are actual reasons to be concerned about overbroad powers being given to the public protector. I mean, our constitutional scheme really does envisage what we would call a separation of powers. And that's not just a principle that applies to the president and to courts and the legislature, but also to Chapter 9 institutions. We need their powers to be carefully circumscribed whilst still being effective. And the kind of argument brought forward by both the EFF lawyers and the DA's lawyers call for a very radical interpretation of what the public protector's powers are. And we all have to remember that ultimately institutions outlive their current occupants. So what happens when someone of less ethical or moral fiber than Thuli Madonsela occupies the office of the public protector? Remember, her term as public protector is soon coming to an end, and it's non-renewable. What then? Who chooses the public protector? It's obviously the National Assembly, the ANC-led government. So we need to be careful when we give overbroad powers to a particular personality just simply because of their moral standing. We actually have to think beyond the facts of this case. And it calls for a lot of concern that there wasn't much discussion about that point in the court today.
But why should that be an issue if one takes into account, I mean, why do we have a public protector in the first instance? Is it not because we have to protect the most vulnerable in society? So why should the focus be on curtailing their powers instead of giving them more, for argument's sake?
Well, this is also because judgments also outlive the current court as well. So we can't all just simply rely on the fact that the public protector is designed to protect the interests of the very, very vulnerable. The real question is about how far she can go in protecting that vulnerable group. No one before the court today was in any way disputing the fact that the public protector's powers have to be effective, to use the words of the EFF's lawyer, Mr. Trengrove. However, the question of how effective is still up for debate. The constitutional text is not very clear about that. It only calls for appropriate remedial action. And even before it gets to that, it specifically says that Parliament may regulate the powers of the public protector. So all of this is still very ambiguous, and the only way we can go about trying to figure out what it means is that we actually have to consider all the interests at work here, the interests that work in favor of the public protector and for a broader reading of her powers, but also the interests that actually call for a rather more moderate interpretation of her powers. We can't always just jump the gun, as it were, and just simply decide the facts in favor of the position we already hold. The Constitution itself must guide us first.
Well, Advocate Trengrove spoke about the unique duty of the National Assembly in a matter of high political contention. Just from what we saw today, what came through at the Constitutional Court, did the National Assembly or members of the National Assembly MPs really cover themselves in glory on this one?
Well, sadly, I do not think they did. The real core of the issue as it concerned the National Assembly was about how far their powers could go in their oversight role over the president. Were their powers so broad that they could effectively usurp the powers of the public protector? And that was the real crux of the issue. And that, sadly, was not really defended in any real rigorous way. In fact, I think it was Justice Cameron who made that point, that really it's not about the powers of the National Assembly on an everyday basis. It's about that relationship with the public protector.
And on the issue of them defying the public protector, and just how, critical was that point?
So this is the other point. It's not so much about whether they defied the public protector, but far more that did they ignore the legal effects of her report? Did they try to undermine her? And there is a distinction between those two things. If they defied the public protector, it would simply mean that Parliament just ignored her. However, it seems that Parliament was trying to do something quite different, which was they were trying to exercise an oversight role over both the President and the public protector. And the question is, how far can Parliament go in actually doing that?
Well, we will examine that further a little later on when we play the clip, the conversation or the exchange between the Chief Justice Mogoeng and the legal representative of the Speaker of the National Assembly. That's after this short ad break. Well, the most dramatic part of the proceedings was when, in spite of all that had happened, including President Zuma's lawyers' concessions, Parliament's lawyers were still in a fighting mood.
The remedial action that was directed by the public protector, she says the President is to report to the National Assembly on his comments and actions on this report within 14 days. She stops there. She doesn't tell the National Assembly what to do upon receipt of the report. Now, at that point, we submit justices. When the report finds its way to the National Assembly, the Section 42(3) powers of the National Assembly kicked in. And the process that unfolded from then on is, with respect, to be viewed in that context.
Let me just try to understand the National Assembly's position. Does the National Assembly accept as correct the meaning given to the public protector's remedial action, to the benefit of all the written submissions and oral submissions in court, as articulated by those who came before you?
Chief Justice, it's not necessary to deal with that question insofar as the actions of the National Assembly are concerned in this matter. In order to determine whether the National Assembly has acted properly or not, it's not necessary to deal with whether the powers are binding or not, because firstly, the public protector did not direct the National Assembly to do anything. So the question of whether or not the Assembly was bound by this report does not arise on the facts of this case. That's the first thing. But the second submission that we wish to make in that regard is that the powers of Parliament, such as they are such that they cannot be fettered by any Chapter 9 institution, and that institution with respect includes the public protector with respect. And when the President reported in terms of the Ethics Act, the general powers of the Assembly of oversight and accountability and scrutiny arose. Yes. And that's hence it's not necessary for us to determine that. That issue is not determinative of of how
Yes.
our client has gone about.
When the report of the public protector was received by Parliament and the report by the President was received by the National Assembly, what is it that the National Assembly was, in terms of the Constitution, required to do?
Yes.
You see, we need to find out, first, what is it that it was required to do, and did it do what was required of it?
What the National Assembly was required to do, Chief Justice, was to scrutinize the executive action that was at the center of the report. It is the executive action that the National Assembly has oversight powers over.
Within the context of the findings of the public protector and the remedial action taken.
The public protector, what the public protector did, took remedial action against the President, not against the National Assembly.
No, that is a common cause, I think.
Having done so,
yeah,
he said, you report yourself to your master in terms of the Ethics Act, because you must account to your master, who is the National Assembly, with your comments and the actions taken. And which is what the President did, that on the 2nd of April.
What then are the obligations that rest upon the National Assembly which ought to have been carried out? What is it that the Constitution then required of the National Assembly to do?
Indeed. What the Constitution, at the risk of repeating myself, what the Constitution required of the National Assembly to do when one of its own reports to say, I have allegedly breached the Code of Ethics. It then says, in terms of 42.3, scrutinize.
Wasn't the responsibility of the National Assembly to then hold the President accountable based on the findings and the remedial action taken by the public protector, as opposed to conducting an investigation that is designed to show that the public protector is wrong? That's really what I want to know.
No. Chief Justice, what action the National Assembly was to take after the scrutinizing the decision, it's not something that could be, in other words, it cannot be a rubber stamping. So the National Assembly was obliged to scrutinize that action. And what does scrutinizing mean? So it could have eventually enforced, but it's not a question of enforcing without more.
Well,
because then you're dealing with a fettering, you're dealing with a dictation, you're dealing with abdication. And that can never be the scheme.
I'm sure you have forgiven me in advance for interrupting you in the manner that I do. I'm only trying to understand the submissions of the National Assembly. The responsibility of bodies like the National Assembly was to hold the executive accountable by ensuring that they are implemented. No. What's wrong with that?
What is wrong with that, Chief Justice, is that it confers a power to the public protector that she does not have. She cannot direct Parliament on how it should conduct its affairs.
All right, let's take it in stages.
She cannot dictate to Parliament and say, yes, Parliament, get him to pay, otherwise invoke 89(1), for example. That she cannot do.
Is it open to the public protector in the exercise of her constitutional powers to say, we are satisfied that these are non-security features and a portion for their construction must be paid by the President?
Parliament had to apply its mind to the executive action. That was the subject of the report.
Let me put my question differently.
To do otherwise.
As part of scrutinizing and so on, is it open, or was it open to the National Assembly to set aside the remedial action taken by the public protector or to nullify, render of no force and effect the remedial action taken by the public protector.
Ours is a different function. Ours is not an enforcement. We're not the sheriff. Ours is not an enforcement mechanism or similar akin to the sheriff of a court, where we would. Her remedy lies elsewhere. She might just want to approach the court and get a mandamus, but she cannot look to Parliament and expect of Parliament to merely rubber stamp without applying its mind, because Parliament would be acting too eagerly to enforce. So the role of Parliament is different, and that's our emphasis.
Mr. Moshikaro, the National Assembly's legal representative coming out, guns blazing. Did she have to do that, or why do you think she was behaving the way she did?
Well, she has a client to represent, so she can't just simply lay back. But more importantly than that, though, there is that distinction that even the Chief Justice himself eventually drew. It's one question to ask whether Parliament was trying to actively usurp the powers of the public protector and shield the President from any of the remedial action, whatever force that remedial action may have in law, applying to the President. It's quite another to expect Parliament to simply accept whatever recommendations or remedial action that the public protector may have in the way that Parliament itself seeks to execute its constitutional authority of oversight. Those two things are very different. One actually asks whether Parliament is acting in good faith. And it seems that in this case, or rather in the Nkandla saga, a lot of people are just simply suspicious of Parliament's intentions. But that does not mean that we go ahead and we confuse the two powers and the two functions. The separation of powers does require that Parliament respect the powers of the public protector. But equally, the public protector must respect the powers and the discretion of Parliament. So that point did have to be hashed out, and it was, in essence, actually necessary.
Do you think Advocate Nkosi Thomas managed to make a point, though?
Sadly, I think that what she would have needed to do is actually show the good faith of Parliament. Instead, what Advocate Nkosi Thomas SC chose to do was rather say that we don't have to decide the powers of the public protector. But the problem is, to answer the question of whether Parliament was trying to usurp the powers of the public protector, we need to know what they are. And she had to have a firm opinion of that. And what she could have done is simply take the line that the High Court did in the DA versus the SABC matter surrounding Hlaudi Motsoeneng, and simply just say that, yes, this recommendation and these remedial powers do have some legal effect, but they don't have the same legal effect as a court order, or as Advocate Trengrove suggested, as an administrative order. Rather, it requires that the agency, given these remedial instructions, explain itself to the public protector. And if those explanations are not good enough, then that can be taken on review to a court. And that's a very different position from what the Supreme Court of Appeal said, or even what the EFF lawyers are saying. So there was an avenue open to her, but sadly she just didn't seize it. She thought that she could go around the problem, as it were, instead of actually just having to go through it and look it straight in the eye.
So was it a missed opportunity?
It was. This may be unpopular for a lot of people currently to actually accept, but she did actually have some argument and some force of law behind her arguments. It's just that, sadly, she didn't go far enough. And of course, she was also handicapped by the fact that the president's own lawyers then made all the concessions that they made. But that's irrespective of the actual merits of her case. And it really would be a missed opportunity for the court not to engage with that kind of argument and not to actually really apply its mind to the interpretive exercise. The court can't assume, the way the Chief Justice seemed to assume that remedial action automatically means binding force of law, the equivalent of a court order or an administrative order. He has to argue that, and any court really has to show why that is. And the constitutional language doesn't necessarily lead us there, as the High Court found.
Well, I want us to play another another clip, which was that of the lawyer representing the Minister of Police. By Minister Nkandla's own admission, the events of the past week have moved rather fast.
Few days, the train has been moving too fast, almost leaving us behind, and the submissions have been made on behalf of the President as to what is the stance of the President.
What do you think, Mr. Moshigaro, was the effect of that admission by the lawyer representing the Minister of Police?
Well, I think he's quite correct. I think Advocate Gauntlet for the President also made the same kind of point, really, except, of course, he was trying to turn it into a point in the President's favor. That simply that there is not what we would call in law a live issue anymore. There is no longer a debate about the public protector's powers would be that line of argument. However, I think it was the Deputy Chief Justice who pointed out that it may not have a direct effect on the two parties necessarily on this matter, that is Nkandla, but it does have greater relevance for our constitutional democracy. As I said before, institutions outlive their current occupants. So we need to have a clear idea of exactly what is the extent of the public protector's powers, but more importantly, what are the limits of those powers?
Well, what do you think, but where does that leave people like the Minister of Police, like the Minister of Public Works, given the roles that they played respectively throughout the duration of this saga?
Well, I think the correct approach to take to the actions of the Minister of Police and the Minister of Public Works would simply just say that their actions are really quite irrelevant to the entire proceeding. It doesn't really matter what parallel process they may engage in. They can feel free to have all the task teams that they want, but where that stops is when it encroaches on the powers of the public protector. Again, I sort of sound like a broken record, but the separation of powers would also apply to them. So there are limits to their powers as well, as much as there are limits to the powers of the public protector. So they can't just, like Parliament, assume that they can usurp the functions of the public protector. And that's really the key there that we need to understand, that ministerial task teams really have very little legal effect on the remedial powers of the public protector.
Mr. Moshigaro, thank you very much for your insights and for being part of the show this evening.
Thank you very much for having me, Vuyo.
Well, for the woman who started it all, it was a happy ending. We're leaving you with the reaction from the public protector herself. Good night.
Looking at the number of parties that are involved in this case, that is all overwhelm you to see how many parties have come out to your defense, your office defense.
It's been quite encouraging, not only the ones that are in defense of our office's powers, but we've also been encouraged by the ones who were objecting to those powers, and they've subsequently looked at the Constitution and the Supreme Court of Appeal judgment, and they've now made concessions, and we're very happy about that.
Do you think it was drawn out for too long, considering that now we have a concession from the President that the powers of the public protector or the remedial action is actually binding up until you take it under review?
Well, it was drawn out. It was said that it was drawn out, but as people keep arguing, they thought that they were right, and now that they are persuaded that they were wrong, it's a good thing that they have come to terms with the decision I made.